Welcome everyone to this first live session on ecological and feminist macroeconomics. It is a great pleasure to be with you all here. You know, we had the welcome session right before, and now we have the honor to have Simone D'Alessandro, who is a professor of economics at the University of Pisa in Italy, and to have İpek İlkkaracan, who is a professor of economics also at the Istanbul Technical University. I'm honored to have them here because in the field of ecological and feminist macroeconomics are among the most prominent scholar because of the cutting edge research that they are doing. I will not go in the details of introducing who they are because I think you are already familiar with this. By now you have already watched the lectures that they kindly recorded for us. So the idea is that we can straight away start with the conversation among themselves first, and then with the participant. So the live session, this live session, and all the others of this week will be structured as follows. As you know, first I will ask each of the speakers to briefly summarize the recorded lecture, then to comment on the other teacher lecture, and then there will be a conversation between the two. And then meanwhile, you can start asking questions and making comments in a chat. You can start from right now, and Braulio and Thiel will be collecting them, and then I will be posing these questions to the speakers, right? In general, you know what is the topic of today is not just ecological and feminist macroeconomics as two separate disciplines or fields of research. But in this session and in this summer school, we want to learn exactly what they can learn from each other, what kind of similarities we can see, what differences, not to create more distance, but to understand the difference and see also what we can learn exactly from that. So without further delay, I would give the word to Simone and then to İpek for you to summarize your talk and make already a comment on the others teacher lecture to start this conversation. Thank you very much for accepting for being here today.
Okay, thank you very much, Federico, for creating this platform and this opportunity for exchange. So I'm really not an expert on feminist economics, so really is an opportunity for me also to learn something. So thank you very much for that. Okay, probably most of you have already seen my lecture. So it was a quite basic discussion on not only on ecological macroeconomics, but mainly on how we can try to face the ecological social crisis that we have today. And I think a starting point can be some of the comment that Federico was making this morning about the compatibility between the Sustainable Development Goals. So if you remember, Federico was saying that sometimes there can be some trade-off between the achievement or trying to the policies for the achievement of one goal with respect to some other goals. And I think that this is the main topic and the main question for ecological macroeconomics. So trying to understand in this complex environment how social and environmental objectives can be taken together. And of course, this is really a difficult question, okay? So it's a difficult question because we know that there are many feedbacks between the reaction of the social and economic system and the reaction of environment. And both things are getting very fast, very wide and difficult to analyze. So this is the main reason why, most, I don't know if this is the right word, but a lot of people that work in ecological macroeconomics starting doing some kind of simulation models. Because of course, part of the issue is how we can shape our society for being sustainable in terms, in terms of the social and the ecological dimension. Okay, so then, of course, the issue is this one. So, for instance, if you make a policy for reducing CO2 emission, like developing or renewable energy sources, how the system react to it? Because, of course, so you can imagine that maybe the, I don't know, the energy intensity or the CO2 emission will decline, But of course, the general and the final effect depends on how these these investment contribute, for instance, to growth. This means that if you are not taking into consideration all the aggregate effect, what you can end up is a sort of small understanding of a sort of cause and effect, while maybe there are some circular causality that can prevent you to really solve the issue. Okay, so the usual topic in ecological economics is the Jevon paradox. No, that of course will say that if you are increasing efficiency, for instance, on engine, of course people spend less money in fuels, and so of course you have an incentive to use much more the scooter or the car or whatever, and thus at the end it is possible that the use of fossil fuel increases, or at least is not decreasing as expected. Okay, so this issue about Jevon paradox is really one important issue to understand how also some policies that are quite standard, like increasing efficiency, can at a certain point have some crowding out effect. Okay, so it means that the effect of the policy is much less than what you expect when you start the policies. So the things are much more complex, because the kind of policies that we are discussing are much more important and general. And but I have one thing that is sort of at the basic of this approach of ecological macroeconomics, is the idea that equity and ecology goes together. Okay, or fairness maybe sometimes be better. So why they have to go together? So this is not a new concept. Okay, so this is a concept that already in the Stockholm Conference 50 years ago, in 1972, okay, it was quite clear that in order to achieve sustainable development, you have to meet the need of the present generation. What does it mean? It means that you have to reduce inequalities if you really want a sustainable society. And on the other side, of course, you need to preserve the natural capital in order to give to the future generation the possibility of achieving and sustaining their need. Okay, so this issue of intergenerational equity is important, but also is important the equity on the present generation. So for this reason, I think that the ecological macroeconomics and feminist economics are really strictly related. So I mean that when we speak about equity or equality, we are not meaning only equity in terms of income, no? So a reduction of inequality, of income inequality. But of course, we know that many other inequalities are really important today. And of course, gender issue is one of the main issues that we have in our societies. So I'm from Italy, so we know that most of the care work is made by women, even in a quite developed country. And so I think that İpek clarified really well this issue in her talk, in the sense that if you remember, so I don't, İpek, do you mind if I just use a couple of slides of your presentation just to make a couple of comments?
Go ahead, absolutely, no problem.
Okay, so because I try to do it, I don't know if I can, but could you see it? Okay, so you see that this is from the İpek presentation, so it's not my work at all. So but I have this is really a clear representation of how unpaid and paid work are distributed unevenly between men and women. Okay, so women are taking most of the unpaid work, so the care work, and while men are mainly involved in the paid work area. Not only that, of course, you can, so if you saw the presentation, you understand there are many other issues that are important. So, but however, there is an issue on inequality here that is, I think, very important. So if you want to find a sustainable economy that is sustainable inside the planetary boundaries, but should be also able to solve this kind of issue. Okay, so this is something that is important, as well as the respect of planetary boundaries. So the other issue that I think is important is that this idea of working on the purple economy, I think, is something that really can make a lot of complementarities with the work of ecological macroeconomics. And I would like to discuss with Ipek a couple of issues that I will try to just to say at the end of this, this short talk. So, but one issue I think that goes in the same direction is something connected to this, so the labor market regulation. So in ecological macroeconomics, there is a lot of discussion about the impact of working time reduction, okay? So working time reduction is something that probably is connected. I don't know if this is exactly what Ipek has in mind here, but so we can discuss later. So but however, a reduction of working time can free a lot of men of taking care or a bit of care of like purple economy, but at the same time, so parental leave, a reduction of full-time jobs and so on. But at the same time, we know in terms of ecological impact that there can be some positive effect. So here the literature, the ecological economics and ecological macroeconomic literature is not fully clear, but at least there are two issues that are important. So one is what is called the composition effect. So what I mean that if people are reducing the working time, is it possible that they start to use the time that they have in order to reduce the energy consumption? But of course, it's also possible that people will like induce some other activities that are really energy intense. So empirically, it's not easy to understand exactly what's going on. But of course, it's also an issue of policies that is possible to clarify that the time, the reduction in time constraint that you have can make you like possible to reduce a bit the energy consumption. So remember that this is something that I believe is really important. If people have no time, it's very difficult for them to adapt to the new situation. So I mean, if we are planning an economy where people change their behavior, in order to change the behavior, they need the time to make some adaptation. So if people are fully, so their time is completely full from the workplace and maybe the care income and the care work at home, then it's really difficult that they can find the time to adapt, to implement new technologies, to implement new way of life in order to reduce their own consumption. So I think that one trajectory that can go together between these two worlds of the purple economy and the green economy is really this idea of reducing, to improve the distribution of work between men and women, but also in these two dimensions, no? The paid and the unpaid work. So this is something that really can help people to have time to implement better behavior that are environmental friendly. Okay, so this is the nice part that I think that goes together. There are many other issues that, of course, are going in the same direction. I try to stress a couple of issues that probably are still debatable, and that is something that also Federico was trying to say very shortly. So this is another interesting slide that clarify a bit. So okay, Ipek, then probably you will explain much better than me. But so the idea is that investment in social care are really an important lever through which you can reduce gender inequality. Okay, so it's something that can really goes in the right direction, mean to equalize so to reduce the inequality, the gender inequality in our society. So I have this question for you. So maybe, or if you want, I can do later. But just to have in mind one of the questions that an ecological economist can say. So in the supply side, it seems to me that there is a sort of risk of commodification of the care. So because at a certain point you was saying, okay, there is an increase in the child care services that should be universally, and that, of course, I agree. So I have 2 kids, so I know that without child care, I would not be here today. So for instance, sorry for the plane. And okay, so but at the same time, of course, you can free time for women to reduce the time constraints and so to increase labor productivity. So from one side, it seems to me that that can be this issue that you are providing some services that commodify the care, so the care economy. And from the other, of course, women can increase labor supply. So a neoclassical economist would say that maybe also the wage in the labor market for some sectors can reduce because there are more competition, there are more labor supply. And so, okay, just to make some like things that I think is a bit problematic, but maybe I'm wrong. The second issue is a bit more interesting to me about the approach that we're using in our simulation. This is a very nice result about the work that İpek and others have done until now. So it means that an increase in investment in in the care income would make a big increase in total jobs respect to other sectors, for instance, construction, like in this sector. So how much this is linked to growth effect? So in the sense that, as usual, you know that most of the ecological macroeconomists believe that the size of the economy is too high, and it's too big, sorry, and that probably we have at least to shrink the production in the developing economy. So if you want, in the growth perspective, and so there is a bit the risk that this kind of sustain to the care income generate an increase in income that can be problematic from an environmental point of view. So of course, one defense that is important, I think, is that construction is much more resource intense than care income, and that for sure I agree with you. But at the same time, there is also the demand effect, in the sense that an increase in hour of work, so it means an increase in income, it means an increase in demand. So of course, an increase in consumption and energy use. So I think that, of course, we have to find a way to put these two stream of thought together, because of course, again, the only sustainable economy is an economy where the social dimension and the gender inequality disappears almost completely. And of course, we are still living inside the planetary boundaries. So of course, we have to find a solution to all the issue, but of course, it's interesting to try to discuss this kind of, I don't know, trade-off that can appear if we are doing this kind of policies that seems very useful and good. So I would stop here, and sorry for putting some question immediately, but that was something that was asked to me. Okay.
Excellent, Simone. That was a great start. I think we are entering the debate. Questions are coming, and they're all related to what you were saying. So this is excellent. I just remind that here we are. The main research question I posed for the school is how to provide a good life for all within planetary boundaries. And as I reminded in the welcome session of today, the feminist economist in Spain, and I understand this was the main topic also of the conference of the International Society for Feminist Economics that just took place in Quito in Ecuador, is what do we mean by good life? What is a life worth living? And this is a question at the individual level and at the societal level. And how are we going to sustain this life in ecological terms, but of course also in terms of care, no? So I think these are fundamental questions that we need to address. So İpek, please, you have the floor, and thanks, Simone.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity. I'm very happy to be part of this dialogue between ecological and feminist macroeconomics. I think it's very important to have such a platform for dialogue. And thank you, Simone, for also sharing some of the slides from the presentation. I think it made it more clear. I wish I had done the same with your presentation. But I think, since I'm assuming that everybody has seen it, when I ask my questions and make my comments, people will remember what I'm referring to. So, I mean, Simone has already, through his commenting on my presentation, has covered some of, what I've said in the presentation. But briefly, since Federico asked us to start off with a summary, briefly, in way of a summary, I started off, it was just like Simone's introduction to ecological economics. It was a basic introduction to what we mean by feminist macroeconomics. But the initial question is what we mean by feminist economics before jumping onto the question of macro. So one of my points of emphasis was how feminist economics is about going beyond using gender as a dummy variable, as one of the, as some feminist economists have called it. So it goes beyond looking at the question of gender as one of the dimensions of distribution of opportunities, of jobs, of incomes, of time, along with other dimensions such as, for instance, class and other dimensions of origin. It moves beyond that question of distribution, and it integrates an important area of production and consumption that contributes in a phenomenal way into economic and social well-being, and also reproduce one of the main inputs into the market production process, that is labor. So it integrates that whole area, what we call household production, or the domestic sphere, this non-market sphere of production. It makes it visible in as an area for economic focus of economic analysis, which is for most of the time is completely ignored in conventional macro, not only in conventional as in the sense of neoclassical economics, but also in heterodox schools of thought. This area of domestic household production has been ignored for most part. So I think one of the main, so what I emphasize in my presentation is that this is one of the most important contributions of what we call feminist economics and feminist macro. And in doing so, one of the important contributions of feminist macroeconomics and feminist economics altogether has been looking at the mutual feedback effects between gendered economic patterns, such as the gender division of unpaid work, or the gender wage gap, or the gender employment gap. These gendered patterns of the market and the non-market economy, with that of macroeconomic issues such as growth, distribution, and economic crisis. So it is not only a one-way causality that feminist economics looks at from macroeconomics and the market economy to gender and gender distribution patterns, but it also looks at the reverse causality from gender distribution patterns within the household and within the market to the main macroeconomic variables such as growth, distribution, and crisis. Anyway, so there are some of the recent work that has been in the feminist macro debates. One of them is the purple economy model, which Simone has already shown. And then the other one, which I thought was interesting, that there was a lot of overlap with Simone's presentation, using simulation modeling as a way to look at the possible outcomes of the various scenarios. I listened to Simone's presentation with a lot of interest, and I think there are a lot of questions, and they're also already coming out in chat as well, in Q&A as well. But I think for this brief introduction, I will stay with 3 basic points. One of them was when Simone talked about drivers of global emissions, and talked about how, obviously the current efforts that focus on efficiency of energy is not sufficient whatsoever in order to curb the carbon dioxide emissions. But one of those drivers was increasing population, global population. So, and this global population policy is a question of interest, I think, from the environmental ecological perspective, as well as from the feminist perspective. And in the feminist macro perspective, there's a little bit of a tension about this within the feminist debates. Why? because in one context, feminists have used, or women's rights advocates, gender equality advocates, have used the issue of the demographic crisis as a background or as a rationale for asking for better work-life balance policies and more investment in care services. Actually, a Spanish colleague of mine had called, the declining fertility rate in Spain and in most of Europe as the uterus strike, because when women don't find the necessary environment for being able to, reconcile both paid and unpaid work, they go on a uterus strike, was her argument. So this demographic issue has been, reproduction of kids has been as a reference point for some of the feminist claims. And if you will remember from my presentation, I also talked about the care crisis, the crisis of care, which, and as one of the concrete outcomes, sometimes we talk about the demographic crisis as a result of increasing the non-caring economies, non-caring societies. But the tension lies within the conversation between feminist economics and ecological economics, because obviously the world's resources are not able to sustain an ever-increasing population. So what is the, what needs to be the position from an ecological and feminist perspective on the question of demographic crisis, which is usually framed within the boundaries of the nation states, or sometimes even ethnicity, ethnic groups like origin, geographical origin, whereas ecological economics, ecological macro knows no national boundaries, right? Carbon dioxide emissions is a global issue, so we cannot talk about that within the boundaries of the nation state. So with this increasing, obviously on a global level, there is no demographic crisis. What we call a demographic crisis is a particular problem of nation states. So where do we need to stand on this? And this is one question that I would actually, or one issue that I think maybe Simone can comment on. The second question has to do with the proposition of the care income. Now, Simone presented it as one of the social policy responses to the negative impact of environmental policy, and also as a response to the gender income gap. Now, that's a bit problematic also, or debatable again within the feminist perspective, because cash for care, as we call it, if I understand it correctly, Simone, it's a form of universal basic income that's more formulated as a care income, but correct me if I'm wrong. And the debate, and I saw already in the Q&As that somebody was asking me my position on wages for housework, which is, the idea of a care income or cash for care. That's what, automatically recalls wages for housework. And it's been proposed on a wide political spectrum from feminists like Federici to very conservative governments or proposals where it says, women's main job is to, to be mothers and to be wives and to take care of the household. And the governments should recognize that as an important role and pay women and mothers cash for care. And it's implemented in a number of settings. Turkey being one of the recent areas of implementation, cash for elderly and disabled care, where the 90% of the recipients of this cash for care money is low income, low skilled women who quit their jobs in order to receive this minimum wage income from the government in order to take care of some disabled or elderly person within the household. So, and the tension there, I think, is obvious because as Simone has already shown, we are starting from, on a global level, but also particularly in many of the settings, national and geographic settings, we are already starting from a very unequal gender division of labor between paid and unpaid work. And a care income strategy poses the risk of further institutionalizing gender roles and further defining the domestic sphere as a female sphere, and therefore the reverse, the mirror image of it, the public sphere becomes institutionalized more as a male sphere, and decision making and management, etc., becomes more of a remains and becomes even more of a male sphere. So the alternative to a care income is, as some of the feminist economists, such as one of them being Rami Antonopoulos, the Levy Economics Institute, with which I'm also affiliated as a research associate, is actually community works programs or public as employer of last resort programs, jobs for care, or as the purple economy suggests, is investment in care. So, and the idea there is that if we think of the 3R strategy, recognize, reduce, and redistribute unpaid work, a care income strategy, cash for care, recognizes care, but fails to reduce and redistribute it. So, whereas the purple economy type of strategy, the first pillar of investing in a social care services infrastructure and making it widely available for all households, all people, is an alternative strategy. So, but that brings us to the question which Simone already raised, as to whether there would be then a tension. Well, two things, Simone, you brought up. Whether investing in care and creating more jobs in care is problematic from an environmental point of view. And I think you've already commented that it is growing through investment in a service sector such as social care services, is definitely would result in much less carbon dioxide emissions than growing through investment in construction. So I think it's a question of, well, what is the amount of emissions that we can suffer, and how are they to be distributed through the different sectors of growth, the sectoral composition of growth, or also considering the possibility of degrowth being necessary, particularly for that what you show in your graph as the top income groups have been responsible for the as the highest source of increasing emissions. So it really is a question of redistribution of income and consumption possibilities in a way. So to what extent can we address the question of the environmental problem through sectoral composition of growth and through income and consumption redistribution in a more equal way? Because if that is possible, then I think you might create the space for investing in care and addressing also issues about gender inequalities in an ecological manner without threatening ecologically. And finally, the issue of what you said, the risk of commodification of care. The idea is that the 3R, reduce and redistribute components, argues that some of the unpaid care work can be shifted to paid care work, in other words, commodified through professional services. But inevitably, as I also argue within the purple economy framework, we do not want all of the care work to be commodified for sure. And actually a substantial portion of it resists commodification and is likely, and also, we don't want commodification, and through its organic nature, it resists commodification. It's likely to stay within the domestic sphere. So it's a question of actually redistributing the unpaid part that will not be commodified. It's a question of redistribution between men and women. And I think reduction of working time and job sharing is one of the crucial strategies to do it. And my recent work, I've been working with South Korean and Turkish data, combining time use data with income data and employment data. And our new simulations are showing that reduction of employment, what we call full-time employment hours, or the workplace opening and closing hours, actually has a huge potential for redistributing unpaid work from women to men within the household. So I think I'll stop there. I'm sure that I have a whole bunch of other notes, but I think we're already, Simone and I are already past our initial introduction time, and I'll leave it to Federico to facilitate.
Fantastic, İpek. This is obviously getting very exciting for all of us, I think, and this is really great. I also wanted to see how the format would work, and I think it works very great. I think there is no pressure with time. It is really up to you to take all the time you need to express your doubts and make your points. I think this is what the participants are really looking for. Obviously, there are many questions coming in. I will now give you the time to interact with each other, but just to give you an idea, we are trying to group the questions. So the macro themes that are emerging in the chat are more or less, what is the potential for a convergence between feminist and ecological economics? And here there are certain issues that you already touched upon, and you will continue in a minute. No, for instance, the issue of valuation. No, how do we recognize nature and care, for example, just monetary valuation? The issue of care work and care income, and the relationship with the labor market, working time reduction, so on and so forth. This is obviously very important, and there is a whole bunch of questions on this. Then there is another block of questions which regard the relationship between mainstream economics and feminist and ecological economics. Of course, we will talk later on the issue of growth, degrowth, and then I would say the issue of the politics of transition. So the subjects of change, the relationship with the pandemic, and also your work on modeling, the relevance for policy making, but also for social movement and so on and so forth. But anyway, I'm not introducing now new questions. I just wanted to give you a brief overview of where the questions that are getting I pointed to. So I would very much give the floor to Simone to comment on what İpek said, and then again to İpek. And we can keep this back and forward as far as needed. And then I will start also maybe adding some questions that are coming from the participants. Thanks.
Thanks, Fede, because I was trying to look at the Q&A. There was a bit, it's not easy to follow. I'm really happy that there is this interest on this issue. So I will start, so again, with this idea of care income. Notice that, so again, I was saying at the beginning, I'm not an expert on feminism and feminist economics. So my approach was mainly to try to discuss to make a comparison of something that also inside the feminist movement is also discussed, between introducing some universal basic income, universal care income. Before saying something about the difference and how we implement it in our models, the point that I would like to sustain is this one. So if we imagine an economy that in 2050 is totally decarbonized, we are imagining a completely different economy and society with respect to the ones that we have today. Okay, so in order to make this transformation, we'll have a lot of crises and issues, also in the labor market, but also in the behavior of people. So we have a big change in our society. So for the reason, I think that universal measures like universal basic income or universal care income can be a way to give a sort of basic, so no, a basic resources for people to make, like to find a new job, to find a solution to some problem that appears. So remember that in Italy, after the pandemics, 2 days ago, they stopped, there was the block of firing, okay, in the market. They stopped this block, and today 450 workers in a plant close here to Florence in Tuscany, they were fired, okay, with an email, okay. So this, of course, there is the crisis, there is the pandemic and whatever, but however, the issue was that this firm was producing components for engine of cars, and probably there is a matter also connected to ecological transition and all the measures that, of course, engines of cars would change in the next future. Okay, so when there was these windows that firms can fire workers, they do. So it means that 450 families has a big issue today. So I think if we want to imagine this transition, to make possible this transition, we have a thousand of these cases around. So a universal measure is a way to fix at least a minimum, no? So something that can allow people to take some active policies in the labor market or whatever in order to find a new job. And also for the firm itself, if you want, no? For the owners of the firm. Okay, so then in this idea of universal, why we believe that this could be important to focus on care income. So first of all, what we do. So I think for the basic income, I think everything is clear. So we found an amount that can be given to all the adult population in a certain economy. Okay, what is care income instead? So we try to make this compensation proportional to the time of unpaid work. Okay, so I mean, if I'm in a group of people that has 4 hours per day of care income, we'll get 4 times more than ones that has 1 hour of care income of unpaid work per day. Okay, it's clear at least how it works. So it's universal, but with selective depending on the amount of work that is made. Okay, so I don't think that this is really an issue of a wage for the work. That was something that İpek was saying, but it's mainly a sort of a reward, a monetary reward for a work that today is not paid at all. Okay, so but however, again, I don't want to defend this discussion, that I know that this is really important, and so there is a discussion inside the feminist movement also about this issue. So what I think is interesting is the impact of this kind of policies. So because of course there is a trade-off. The trade-off is the one that İpek was saying. So of course, if you do this kind of universal measure, then there is also a reduction on the labor market participation rate of women, in the sense that some women tend to keep out from the labor market because they have so can be sustained by with the care income. But for this reason, we discuss the introduction of these policies together with the work interreduction. Okay, and what we show is that making the two policies together, we can reduce this negative effect of care income, in the sense that and there was also a better distribution of paid work between genders. Okay, so of course our simulation, there is many assumptions that we are making. So, but however, even if there is the trade-off that İpek was presenting pretty well, so it seems that is a possibility to make a strong reduction of the gender inequality in terms of the income gap, and a small but consistent, significant this better distribution of the care of the unpaid work between men and women. Okay, so of course there are ideas. So in the sense that we have to discuss, we have no time to write the paper yet. So it's really something that we have the result of the simulation, where we have to think a lot about this issue. My idea is that again, that probably I don't see a big issue in terms of metrification of care, about assuming this kind of care income. So, but however, I understand also the issue that İpek was saying, that is clear, no? That probably you tend to reduce the incentive for women to go in the labor market. That, of course, is there. Okay, so this is about at least what we have. Okay, then of course we can discuss. And again, I don't want to defend it. It's just a comparison. It's works much better than basic income with respect to income gap, so gender income gap. Okay, so this was one issue. Okay, the other is this one, according to the population issue. So of course, population is a problem in the long run. Okay, so but again, from an ecological macroeconomic perspective, so we have targets for the 2030. Okay, so I think that population dynamics is really important. We know that, so I'm a development economist, so I know that the reduction of fertility was one probably of the main drivers of development that we have in most of the developing countries. So of course, I agree with this, but I think it's not really the drivers of the sustainable economy that we have to do in 2 decades or something like that. So I think there is a problem of time scale between the importance that can have a change in the population dynamics. So you know that from a demographic perspective, the change in the population rate of growth is really slow, no? In the sense that there is an inertia on these population dynamics that, of course, if you really today you change the fertility by 1%, I don't know when you have a reduction of growth of population by 1%, but probably you spend so many years now before having some. So whatever, I agree that is an issue, of course. But however, if really the climate crisis is an issue that we have to solve in a couple of decades maximum, probably the population is not really the core driver. So this, of course, is an opinion. Okay. I will stop here and then.
Yeah, that's good. We have time then to address the other questions. İpek, you maybe want to react on this.
Yes, very quickly before we go on to the other questions. So, Simone, yes, the trade-off is that it will reduce the incentive for some women to remain in the labor market and to have access to earnings beyond what a universal basic income would provide them with, and all the the extra what's the word, amenities that having a job provides you with, like networking, being in the public sphere, having the potential to achieve some decision making, have some influence in decisions being made, and so on. So what I would like to also emphasize is that in that trade-off, it is not only at the expense of deepening gender inequalities in terms of access to employment, jobs, and earnings, but also it is at the expense of deepening inequalities amongst women, because a lot of studies and research and experience from basically Europe, Northern Europe, for instance, and also to the extent that I know France, shows that when in the 1960s and 70s, there were experiments with making cash for care and putting a child to the cash for childcare versus putting the child in a crèche, in a childcare center, were made into an option that families could choose between. It was usually the lower income, the lower skilled, and immigrant women who opted for the cash for care option. And I think one of the important things that we need to be aware of there is that when a family or a lower skilled, lower income woman looks at the options of having a low wage job, low paying job under not maybe that great work conditions, versus the government offering her some cash for care for taking care of the small child or the elderly person in the household, I think in a way, it may make sense, at that moment in the short run rationality for the woman to opt out for the cash for care option. But that also has implications from a perspective of children's rights, right? So that inevitably, eventually the reason that countries like France and the Scandinavian countries put childcare centers as the main option rather than giving this choice of cash for children care versus the childcare centers, because they felt that it turned into a situation where it was the children of immigrant families, low-income immigrant, low-skilled families, who were being kept at home and deprived from the possibility of having access to early childhood development possibilities, because their families prefer the cash rather than the option of services. So I think it's a very complicated issue that has all these different perspectives about deepening the inequalities amongst women and households by socioeconomic class, the children's perspective, also the elderly people's perspective, who may prefer in many instances home-based professional services, a combination of household produced unpaid care services, long-term care services, and professional care services, which many studies show that actually increases the quality of life for people who are dependent on long-term care as well. So my final question to you on this would be, given the burning trade-offs that lie in there, would you consider investment in care to create care jobs, to convert some of that unpaid work into paid care, and have that as a source of employment generation, as a possibility from where you stand, as a new possibility that you would explore in addition to reduction of employment hours in your simulations from now on? So that would be one question that I would pose to you. And on the general issue of universal basic income, yes, it's a nice proposal, but if given limited resources, particularly from a developing country perspective, if the option of universal basic income is taken up without first meeting the preconditions of access to high quality basic services such as healthcare, education, early childhood development, long-term care, and without also the government, the state, being an insurer, a guarantor of access to decent jobs for those who want it. So if these two preconditions are not met and the resources are put into universal basic income, I think that's where it becomes problematic. But then the question is, if we want to do all three, then do we have enough resources, and what are our priorities? I think that's where the question stands. Yes. Yeah, I think that's it for the time.
So I have no much to add. So, okay, the question that you, so, okay, there are many, so again, it's not easy to think about the best policy, no? This is something that I think there are no like win-win solution many times, so probably not in this case, but in the general issue of sustainability. And so, of course, any proposal should be thought carefully. So, of course, I completely agree with you that public services, so that there are employment that is sustained by the government, can be a solution for many issues. And this is something that we try to test in some of the models. So assuming that the state can make some employment or like guarantee work, something like that, in order to ensure some services. Again, this probably is a policy that can be made in many cases, and probably this issue how to think about something that can be used in the care income sector or in the care sector, it will be really interesting. So I was thinking how to do it, but so it's a different topic and questions. But however, I think is one road that is important to investigate. And this is also in the same direction as I was saying. So we are in a phase of big transition that we have to do. So job guarantee can be really a way in which you are reducing much of the stress to many of the households. So there is also many reasons to go in that direction. Fede, I don't know if...
Yeah, no. İpek, do you want to make an extra comment on this, or you are fine for the time being?
No, just a question. I wonder if there's any work or classification in a quantitative manner in terms of categorizing jobs or scaling, putting jobs on a scale of high carbon dioxide emitting jobs versus low carbon dioxide emitting jobs, like on a spectrum.
I don't think so.
Could there be any jobs? Could there be any jobs that do not?
No, there are data about the industries. So of course, and CO2 related to industry. So maybe you can think about which is the increase in emission if you increase that industry of a certain number of jobs. Probably that can be made. There are some data. What should be? So I think it's something that there are some work also by. So I don't remember. I will share with you. I think we have something about this.
And I should add, if such a comparison is to be made, I mean, obviously, any human activity has the potential to cause emissions, right? whether it's leisure, unpaid work, or paid work. So I think the comparison in this case, in our discussion, the comparison would need to be made. What would the emissions cause if that same care activity is being conducted on an unpaid basis within the household versus in a local center? Local center, I'm emphasizing local center in order to eliminate the possibility of transport-related emissions.
This is true. And I take the opportunity to stress another thing that you were saying that I think is really important, that different countries, so especially poor and rich countries, would have to find different solution to the issue, of sustainability, and also for gender or environmental issues. So the issue was saying about universal basic income is important, of course. Services are much more important, so it can be much more productive in a sort of a social sense or sustainability sense that universal measure. So I think this also clarify why we try to focus mainly on country level because it's very difficult to generalize to a global level. And this I think is important.
I think in relation to what İpek was saying, I recently read a paper on work time reduction in, I think it was in Norway, and the paper was trying to discuss exactly this. If you reduce work time in the paid sector, then in what type of activities would people engage with? And the paper was making the distinction just between paid work or leisure. So the comment I made in my review is, well, obviously there is a mistake there because where is unpaid work? And then the paper was exactly trying to propose a framework in terms of analyzing what would be the environmental impacts of work time reduction. So it was using an estimate by some study of what you are saying, for the different type, not only of type of work, but also type of activity, like for example, political work or in civil society, voluntary work, for instance, or physical activity, or obviously traveling abroad. What are the? I think it was about energy consumption related to the activity, but which is the same thing as talking about emission. So I think that is a question that is interesting. What I don't remember right now is the title of the paper, but I can try to dig it out. So we had this first nice.
That would be great
yes.
if you could share it at some point. By the way, one question. I saw one of the participants ask for the presentations. Are they on the? I did send it to you, right?
So yes, this is something I didn't comment on. So I asked the teachers to share their presentation, and to those who will be willing to share them, I will upload them in the folder where participants find the recorded lectures. The truth is I haven't had the time to do this yet, but I will do it. So I apologize for that and for being late with that. So now I will a little bit, if you don't mind, take again a little bit the lead on the discussion. So as a general question for the time being, as a macro team, keep in mind this question of what potential for a convergence between feminist and ecological macroeconomics. I have the feeling we have been discussing quite a bit on care income, which was important, and work, both paid work and unpaid work. As I feel the responsibility to read a little bit quickly the comments and questions that we got related to this issue before we pass on to the next teams. I don't expect you necessarily to engage with all of them, and I think some of them you have already covered, but I can only do one thing at the time. So either I listen to you or I reorganize the questions, so be patient with me. So on the issue of care income, there was a question which said how a care income is different comparable to universal basic income. I think Simone clarified this. There was somebody asking, first comes Simone and then İpek. Somebody was asking if Simone could elaborate a little bit more on basic income, care income, and working time reduction, and I think he did. What maybe you didn't do, Simone, and people are asking for, if you could go deeper in the relationship between working time reduction and productivity. There is a specific question on that. Then, of course, there is the issue of valuation, which I don't know if you want to comment more. This monetary valuation, these debates are very common no, in relation to commodification, both in feminist and ecological economics. I think we have touched partially a little bit on that. And then to Simone, again, specific, they say in your lecture, you somehow link care income to reservation wage. The participants say, although I can see a relationship, I didn't understand what you were referring to. Maybe you can comment on that. So productivity and reservation wage. Then for IPEC, here a participant says, and I'm reading, unpaid work in macroeconomics. You mentioned that unpaid work includes a lot more than care work. Please, may you give a couple of examples of unpaid work that isn't counted as care work? How could we decide the price for care income? And to Simone, I would ask myself in relation to what you said before, how would we account for the number of hours spent in care work? I think that is a difficult one. Then for IP again, and I'm reading, here it says, the participant says reproductive work is not monetized. That would mean to me that it is not valued in the market, using the Marxian theory of value as I understand it. Therefore, in the macro modeling, I would like to raise the issue of how do we evaluate this invaluable labor form, the one of reproductive work? What value theory would support a feminist analysis? To this question, I would add, what is the theory of value in feminist economics and ecological economics? This, I think, it's at least in ecological economics, is a pending issue. Again, to IPEC, wages for housework, could you clarify your position on the subject more broadly? How do you feel about the work of Silvia Federici? Another question is, why is care work considered as a public good? Specifically, I don't see how it is non-excludable. Relating, caring labor is distinct from other forms of labor in terms of unavoidable labor, intensiveness, and relational nature. This feels like an important intervention against the abstraction and exploitation of labor in a competitive market economy. Rather than seeking ways to commodify and price caring labor to bring it into the monetary sphere, are there not ways in which other aspects of the conventional market monetary economy can take on these characteristics of caring labor towards positive social and ecological outcomes? Another question is, there are studies globally showing that governments couldn't afford to pay for what women provide for free, referring to care and reproductive work. Shouldn't a care wage reflect this? Perhaps an unintended outcome of a very generous care income is that it might attract more men to care work. What do you think? One more, sorry, there are quite a bit.
Federico, I don't think I'll be, yeah. Federico, I don't think I'm trying to follow while you're reading on Q&A, but I'm lost. So maybe it's better to go, in groups.
Yeah,
back and forth.
I can go one by one.
If you don't mind.
Let's stop there. Yeah. Sorry. My plan was
I was
that
first taking notes, then I tried to follow on Q&A, and then I got lost.
Sorry. Sorry. It was me going too fast. My idea was there that I don't think we can address each of the specific questions precisely, but I was just reading them to give an overview of what is left or what people were commenting on the issue of care work, reproductive work, unpaid work, and so on, to give you an idea, and maybe you make like a statement, no, general on this issue, and we take some more time to cover this, and then we move on to the other topics. But I'm sorry, I overdid it. So let me stop there. And you decide, Ipek, if you want to go first, and then Simone, or if you need some time to think about the question, and Simone goes first, whatever you prefer.
If you want, you can go, because I already forgot most of the questions that
I can recall them also.
As you like.
Okay. Let me address the few that I did take down as a note. One of the questions was unpaid work as more than care work. I think what I said was something a little bit more different. What I said in my presentation is unpaid care work is more than domestic household production work. It's more than taking care of members of the same household. It goes also to caring for the community, to caring for the environment. So it includes, in other words, volunteer work, for instance. In one of the recent workshops that I've done with participants from Sub-Saharan Africa, I had a very interesting contribution from the floor, where the participants were pointing out how a major component of women's unpaid work in the Sub-Saharan African context is organizing and coordinating weddings and funerals. So these are not done on a paid basis in many of the less commodified settings, right? This is done on an unpaid basis, and it is women's work. And this is one of the, I mean, what is a wedding and a funeral? It's one of the important ways in which we come together as a community. It's a very important. There are events which are very important elements of social cohesion. And it takes a lot of unpaid work beyond just caring for ourselves and our household members. It also takes a lot of care work for our immediate community, for the larger community, for the global community, for nature, for us to have a sustainable and desirable ways of life. So this is what I was talking about. And I think this will be probably the new frontier in feminist economics research, because there was so much work to be done in terms of household production, unpaid work within the household, that it has not, I think the issue of all that other types of care work for the community, including volunteer work, is still something that's waiting to be tackled. And there is data on it, although less data than there is on the domestic part of unpaid care work. I think I've already answered what I think the wages for housework type of argument, such as like by Silvia Federici. So I don't think we should dwell on it anymore, if you agree. And the question of why is care a public good? Good question. And it's whenever I say it, it's been raised before, and it's particularly meets with a lot of resistance from a more conventional economic framework. The reason, well, first of all, I also, as I said in the presentation, I emphasize care, first of all, as a merit good, right? A good that we want everybody to have, but if it's left to the market dynamics by itself, we know that it will be underprovided. So merit goods with strong positive externalities, or if you don't have those merit goods, there are strong negative externalities. So definitely care as a merit good. But beyond that, classifying it as a public good can be justified on the basis that while, yes, when you're providing care, good care, quality care, and early childhood development opportunities to a low-income child, it is only the child who's consuming that service. So in that sense, maybe it is difficult to talk about non-excludability or non-rivalrous aspect of it, which public goods are supposed to have. But at the same time, at the macro level, if you have a system, social and economic system, where all the children in that society, no matter what type of background they come from, have access to the same high quality early childhood development possibilities, then it makes up for a more equal labor market down the line, over the long run, more equal opportunities type of framework, which has the at a macroeconomic level positive spillover effects. So in that sense, providing a child with good care is non-rivalrous because the overall community benefits from it. So that's the main argument behind it. There's one question that Federico, you didn't say, but it caught my attention in the Q&A as I was following you. The investing care studies, one person said, and I don't remember her name, was it Amber Parks? That has been useful in the work of the person who posed the question, but then is asking, this seems to be done mostly for middle income countries. Are there any examples for lower income countries? Yes, the Levy Economics Institute just completed in the past year two works, two applied studies on investing care, very similar to the Turkish study that I presented, for Ghana and Tanzania. And I think now they're developing a new one on Cambodia and Vietnam. And we are now also developing a similar study for Palestine and Jordan for next year. So they will be, I think, more examples from lower income countries will be coming up.
Excellent, thanks a lot. İpek, maybe Simone, you want to comment on the issue of productivity and reservation?
Yeah, okay, very shortly. So first of all, the main question how we can, like feminist and ecological macroeconomics can a bit goes together. So I think that there is an issue that is from like a modelization approach. So I think that we have to consider in our macroeconomic framework the time use, okay, so of people, because usually in macroeconomics there is no much attention to time use in standard or orthodox macroeconomics. And I think that is also the example that you were saying before about the chapter. So of course, unpaid work is part of our life. So if you want to understand how people behave, of course, we have to take into account the time use as a module, as something that have to enter currently in the macroeconomic. And so what we have done is to use the time use survey just to be a bit more precise about how we measure this. So the change in the in the unpaid work of different groups. So we have, I don't know, 60 groups or something like that. And so we can have for each of this group, which is the average, according to the time use survey, how much is the time spent in unpaid work by different groups. There are many differences, of course, also with respect if you are unemployed or you are employed, if you are a skill or skill, if you are young or old, or maybe if you are, of course, a woman or man. Okay, so we can take into consideration all these groups, and this means that also, you know, if there is a change in the market, so one employee that becomes unemployed or the opposite, then of course there is a change in the time use. Okay, we can measure this change and to try to understand how the things are moving. So about this issue of working time reduction. So usually I'm trying to be quite generic when we speak about working time reduction, because since I'm quite sympathetic with the sort of degrowth, I don't know, the growth movement or research on degrowth, my impression is that if you really want to have working time reduction as an environmental policies, you have to think to working time reduction that is not a working time reduction with salary wage, so monthly wage fixed or annual wage fixed. Is a working time reduction that makes hourly wage fixed. So it means that you reduce your monthly or annual income by the same amount of the reduction of time. So there are two things that are important to say here. So for instance, there was this case of Ireland that is discussed in the newspaper in these days, okay, where instead the opposite appears. So they maintain the same monthly or annual wage salary, and of course they found a big increase in productivity. So what we have instead, usually in some of the model that we have, where the wage reduces, so the wage, the salary, so the hourly wage is constant. What we have is that since the employment rate increases, then hourly wage tend to increase. So of course there is an increase in the hourly wage, but of course probably the wage, the annual salary, the annual income of the workers reduces a bit. Okay, so this is just to clarify. So which is the impact on productivity? Of course, all the estimate that we have says that the reduction of working time increases the productivity of workers. That of course this is important. Okay, so it's also a way to say that of course all of us knows. So maybe I think that most of us working too much, and so we see that our productivity tend to reduce quite fast. So, but of course, also in the data we find that a reduction working time or working time tends to increase the productivity. So what I mean by reservation wage in that slide is a clear point, no? That if you have a sort of reservation option that increases because maybe you have some care income or basic income behind you, then of course you ask for a higher wage. Also, of course, you have a reservation option. You can think about the labor discipline model that is often applied in economics. So the main idea is that, of course, workers would tend to increase the wage. And since in most of our economies, we know that the wage in the last 20 years were declining a lot, I think that if we find some policy that can tend to increase a bit the wage, is something that we should support, because of course we know that the distribution is moving in the opposite direction. That most of the developed countries, the profit share is increasing a lot in the last year, in Italy in particular. I don't know. I think I stopped here. I don't know if I forgot something important.
No, it's fine. I think time is going super fast. There are obviously lots of questions, many more than the ones I'll be able to read, no? But so I will kind of direct a little bit the conversation. I don't know if Ipek wants to comment on what Simone said, but you can do it in a minute. So my proposal here is to move on to debate a little bit the proposals that you were doing also in your lecture, which is on one side by Ipek, the idea of the purple economy, also because it brings together the two dimensions, the feminist and the ecological. And on the other, little bit what Simone was pointing to, and the issue of degrowth, no? And I think there, I mean, it's no secret, it's also my own interest. And I think many participants are also interested in this a little bit. What do you think about the issue of growth and degrowth in general? So here, let me just read 3 or 4 comments by the participant related to this topic. The first is to Ipek, and it asks, you mentioned that gender-aware macroeconomic policy is essential for inclusive and sustainable growth. Does growth in that context refers to absolute growth in the global social metabolism, that is the energy and material flows in the economy? And if so, wouldn't this be incompatible with ecological economics and degrowth? I think this is a big issue for the whole summer school, not just for you two. Then another participant asked, how would the Global South implement their own well-being policies? Can they also talk of degrowth, or should it be a matter of global north? What are the alternatives for GDP measuring well-being? I think this is what Simone already addressed a little bit, no? That degrowth is a proposal for the industrialized countries, and there are many other proposals that come from the Global South for the Global South. But I mean, the incompatibility of economic growth and sustainability is relevant probably for any country in the world. There's a question also related, I'm not reading it literally, but it asks about, there is a link here with the politics of transition, no? We can discuss about policy making, but also about social movements, no? We know that there are many social movements in Turkey and all over the world protesting against development projects, no? And because they consider that these are a case of environmental injustice, no? So does this tell us something about the contradiction between development/economic growth and ecological sustainability? And then last, if you allow, I think this is a little bit related. There's a question on the purple economy. It's a long one, but I think it's worth reading it. And I read literature. So the participant says, it seems to me that the impact of the role of care work in macroeconomics is not understood from an orthodox perspective, continues to be highly debated by conservative parties, but also by left-wing movements or initiatives. For me, says the participants, a purple economy is a measure of social justice, of redistributive justice that does consider planetary boundaries. I also see the risk that the care agenda is captured by the more conservative wings and is seen as a charitable work. It seems that there is a very fine line thinking about loving care in its qualities, and I think there it is very useful to differentiate understanding the macro implication of care and its impact on life, on the rights of women and girls around the world. How to think about degrowth in the face of a crisis of precariousness of the material means of life. How to think about community proposals without neglecting the role of the state as a guarantor of rights. How to think about care without opposing the rights of those who care and those who receive care. I think this last question summarized very well, not the core of this session, but the core of all the summer school. And I think it would be great, I think, if the both of you can comment on this, and we are already moving in the last part of the conversation. I think this links to what we have been saying, to the politics of transition, whether to focus on social movements, on the state, on policy making, and also, of course, to the current context of pandemic. So again, I don't expect from you specific responses to the question, but maybe a general comment on these issues. Ipek, you are invited to go first if you want, but if you feel comfortable, and you can take a minute to think about it if you want. Thanks.
Yeah, no, fine. I'll go first. So when I say gender-aware macro policy is necessary for growth, thank you for giving me the opportunity to clarify this. Absolutely. So yes, of course, I'm talking about growth within the boundaries of green growth, and that's ecologically sustainable growth. So therefore, the possibility of degrowth, the policy option of degrowth is definitely a consideration within the purple economy framework as well. But as Simone has also said, and I think Federico also mentioned it, I think it's a matter of redistribution. So it's, yes, I believe it's more a matter for the global north than the global south, but also within the global north itself or within the global south itself, it is more a matter of the upper income groups, degrowth of the consumption of the upper income groups rather than degrowth of the consumption of the poor or the lower income groups. So it's a matter of, I think, creating the space for growth for those who need it by redistributing the right to emissions from the ones who abuse it and without really needing it in a irresponsible manner to those who really need it, right? For true, because they need it for better quality of life. So I think that the question of degrowth, growth, and what kind of growth is very much interlinked to the question of distribution, therefore. In terms of, the social movements against development projects, it's interesting when we did our research. I mean, of course, it wasn't the Turkish Invest in Care study with the various scenario simulations. Remember, we had 3 scenarios. What if the Turkish government increased public spending equivalent of around 1.2 to 1.8% of its GDP on expanding childcare services versus construction projects, physical infrastructure development projects versus cash transfers to low-income households. So the scenarios came from actually the reality of Turkey, because in the 2000s, Turkey was going through a period of fiscal expansion because it was a period of, up until the 2008-2009 crisis hit, it was a period of robust growth, a lot of international capital flows coming in for real investments as well as financial investments. So it was a balance of payments deficit sponsored finance growth, and the government had a lot of space for fiscal expansion. So it was a pro-cyclical fiscal expansion period. And you look at the budget to see where that fiscal expansion went to, and it went basically to one of the 3 places: physical infrastructure investments with very questionable ecological effects, some of them, cash transfers to households, conditional cash transfers, and also to increasing public employment. So this is why we had we said, if an economy, a macroeconomy, can afford a period of fiscal expansion, how are these sectoral allocations decisions are made? What are the rational criteria as to how, against which a government decides which sector to put more money in and which sectors to put no money in, and in which sectors in which to reduce money. And this was, by the way, a period where the public childcare centers were decreasing in number. They were closing down, some of them. And interestingly, although it was done in this, feminist purple economy framework, this applied research, one of the groups that really picked up on this was the environmental movement, and the movement that was critical on critical of these development projects. So I hear my research being, referenced a lot also in those frameworks. So I think that's, one of the important areas of really convergence, again, in terms of the feminist movement and the ecological movement as, convergence of social movements. And the comment on purple economy, some of the claims of the purple economy being, or around the care economy being captured by conservative movements. Yes, I think this is very much a challenge that we are facing in today's political setting, where we see increasing patriarchal authoritarianism around the world. And that's why I finished my lecture with a slide on the famous book by Margaret Atwood, which has been converted into a Netflix series, and I think that the new season is out, The Handmaid's Tale, which actually is a futuristic dystopia about a world where care is very important. It's like the center of social organizing, but while it's a very caring system, that becoming a very caring economy comes at the expense of extreme gender discrimination, where basically women don't have any human rights. So this is exactly what purple economy is, pointing at. We cannot have, and the other extreme, if you will remember, I gave examples from the Wachowski movies, The Matrix and the Cloud Atlas, where human beings are not reproduced in households anymore, they reproduce in factories. So there's no household production, there's no care, where, reproduction of low-skilled labor is transferred to a mechanized factory setting. So these are the two extremes. One of them is a very caring economy, but very gender inegalitarian. And the other one is an economy that has the potential to be very gender equal, because in the Matrix and the Cloud Atlas, in the dystopia, you don't see gender inequalities necessarily, but it has turned into a completely non-caring economy. So the question is, and that care, I think, also includes caring for the environment, ecological care. And the question is how to have a caring economy without paying the price of inequalities, which is simultaneously egalitarian.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, İpek. Simone, you want maybe to comment on this?
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I fully agree with İpek that the issue is redistribution. Okay, which is the problem here is clear, no? That redistribution is much easier if the cake is growing than if the cake is shrinking or remain constant. No, I was saying in the sense that, so if really for the issue of planetary boundary, we cannot increase GDP or the production side of our economy, then of course the things are getting much deeper. Why? Much difficult. Why? Because of course redistribution means that someone wants to reduce their income while others to increase. So remember, this is really something that I think we saw in the focus on poverty, no? So of course it's really eradicate poverty, of course, so everybody agree, but also everybody agree because you have not to reduce the income or the wealth of no one in order to reduce poverty. So there is no an issue of conflict or redistribution like the ones that we are proposing. So for the reason, I think that the interesting question here is exactly how to find a way to make this kind of redistribution in a situation in which most of the economy cannot grow, at least in the way that we know which, no? Of course. So again, just to clarify a bit this issue, that of course Federico is more expert than me on that. But of course, no one proposing degrowth was really proposing to reduce GDP. So it's not the objective of the degrowth is to reduce the gross, domestic product. But the issue is to change the objectives. So which are our objectives? Is to reduce inequalities and to be compatible with the biosphere, the ecological system. So again, inequalities in a very broad sense that take into account many of the things that we are discussing today. So, of course, again, if achieving this objective would make possible to do increasing the GDP, forget about the GDP. None of us is really against GDP at all. Okay, just to clarify a bit the issue. So, but just to to puntualize this, that I think is important. So, redistribution in the kind of world that we have now, no? To come back to the bolding imaging of the spaceship economy. I don't know, probably most of the students here have seen something about the origin, no, of the ecological economics proposal, no? So that while our institutions are built in a context of a cowboy economy where all the resources were really abundant, now we are in a spaceship economy where everything is scarce. And so, of course, doing redistribution in this situation is much more difficult than before. I would like to that we are honest on this. And so, what I mean, that is a word that probably was not so. I think is the time to discuss it. Is about the conflict. No, of course, the school in Barcelona came out from the political ecology, so they are probably the best people in discussing this issue. So, but however, the issue of conflict will be something that we have to be able to grasp, to discuss, and to understand how this conflict can make a society more sustainable and, of course, more fair and equal between women and men also. Okay, I think I will stop here. I don't know.
So here we really got, and I'm not surprised, no, a little bit on the politics of the transition. No, how do we make all this happen? So I have a particular take on this issue, which is pretty materialistic. No, as Simone just said, in Barcelona, we have developed this environmental justice atlas that you can check online, the ejatlas.org, and it maps more than 3,000 conflicts, environmental conflicts around the world. No, and the idea is that people protest against the environmental impacts of development project because this is affecting their life, their bodies, their health, their livelihood, so on and so forth. And by complaining, they promote also a more sustainable economy. And frankly, if I have to say, I think politically, the most promising alliance that I see is exactly between the feminists and the environmentalists. No, people who experience the discrimination or the oppression on their own skins, no, who can get this incentive to react. And I think this school can explore the potential of the alliance between the two. So maybe we can point in this last part of the discussion a little bit on the questions of the strategies, no? How do we move from here to there, no? To that horizon that we could call the purple economy or degrowth of, or a world of redistribution, no? More just and sustainable world. And I think we can discuss of different strategies in terms of a research agenda for scholars, but also social movement, policymakers, the role of the state. I mean, there are many open questions here which we want to address them all, no? Maybe to be more specific, I can read the question who is the winner question, so to say, in the Q&A session here on Zoom, which I think is interesting, and I am going to read it from Sangeet. And it says, how far along are we in the sites of ecological and feminist macroeconomics being taken up in the mainstream of politics and economics? And is the rate of progress enough to help us deal with our various crises? So I maybe leave it to Ipek and Simone. And we are at 15 minutes before the end, so yeah. we are getting to the end.
Yes. By the way, before I go on to my answers, are we going to be able to get from you what is written on the chat and the Q&A? Because
Yes. Yeah. So in principle,
if you
yes.
can make them, please, if you can share them with us, because there were also some good suggestions and resources that were shared.
Yeah.
So I would like to see them.
Yeah, in principle,
later.
if the chat can be saved, we will save it and make available to teachers and to participants. I haven't been able to see whether Daniele, who takes care of the technicalities, has managed to save it, but I think, yes, it's possible. Should be done. If it's possible, it will be done.
I confirm that the chat can be saved. I'm not sure about the Q&A. I will check it now, but the chat, we are already saving it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the question about strategies, right? Well, I think from where I stand, research-based advocacy, policy research-based advocacy, and communicating the results of that that type of research based on concrete data analysis. And I think simulation that's why both ecological economics and feminist macro use this framework of simulation of different policy scenarios, right? Because it's a good way of pointing out the differences, what happens when you take the different policy strategies or economic policies, and communicating the results of that research beyond, in the academic sphere to policymakers and widely to development practitioners, activists, I think is one of the strategies to, keep developing and working along. And I think, and in that sense, economic policy literacy, particularly macroeconomic policy literacy, is important. One of the things that we've been doing in feminist economics in a number of different contexts is developing training courses. One of them, I work with UN Women to do it, training courses on gender and macroeconomics, for instance, and also the gender, macroeconomics, and international economics network, which is known shortly as the GEM network, GEM IWG, International Working Group, GEM IWG network, has a training program as well. So these training programs are geared towards improving development practitioners and activists' literacy on these different macroeconomic debates and policies, and also bringing in people from, academics, PhD students, for instance, who've been involved in more conventional macro teaching, and giving them access to alternative macroeconomic frameworks. And then this is, I think, what this summer school is exactly about, right? This is what this summer school is also doing. And on the question of to what extent feminist and ecological economics have been taken up within the conventional framework, well, I think, yet to some extent, I should answer for feminist economics. The World Bank and the IMF has started integrating more and more of the perspectives, methods, and tools that have been emerging from feminist economics research into their work. This has started happening pretty much in the past decade or so, and I find this a very welcome development. So there's a lot more emphasis on the interactions of the market spheres of production with the unpaid care sector, and acknowledgement that there are mutual feedback effects, and their modeling exercises and simulation exercises now take into consideration these types of issues that have been raised by feminist macro. So I think there is some progress.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Ipek. Simone?
Thanks, Ipek, also for making clear our responsibility towards not only the academic community, but the young generation of scholars, but also institutions and so on. Okay, on my side, of course, the issue of the ecological transition is a policy issue, no? So we are comparing with all the energy models and other approach that trying to find the right strategy and policies to get some, to achieve a reduction of CO2 emissions to at least lead to an increase of average temperature below the 1.5 degrees. So of course, that it really, I think the strategies is really the question of ecological macro, how to do it. So this was also my motivation for start studying and this topic. And I think that there were some limitations that were clear in the approach. The limitation is that you are studying the energy models, thinking to the relationship between energy and the economy very soft, and really almost there was very few study that was trying to measure the impact of these policies on employment, especially on inequality or on unemployment. No, so this of course is due also to orthodox approach, neoclassical approach with the computational general equilibrium model that tend to avoid all these issues. And again, it's not a problem of taste. It's a problem of which are the problems that you are facing. No? So of course, we know that if you want to make this transition, the issue of inequalities is the issue that you have to face. Otherwise, the transition is not possible. And the Gilets Jaunes movement, I think, in France, clarify that you cannot think about increasing carbon price to solve and to get a sort of carbon budget and I don't know, mitigation cost, and that's all. So this issue about policy is important, but of course, again, the result of the simulation, introduction of these policies can be also strange or now, for instance, in this energy model, I remember a discussion with a friend of mine that is working on this model, and we were saying, well, what happens? I look at the so the questions on the chat, no? And the question was, what happens in this model if you are changing your diet? So if people start to reduce the consumption of meat and you start to be a bit more vegetarian, and they said, no, we couldn't do that on our model because otherwise we don't have the biofuel. And so it's impossible to reach the kind of decarbonization. So the intense livestock is important because it's the only way in which you get that quite cheap biofuel. Okay, so this just to clarify that if you are not taking into consideration all the systematic, the feedbacks, the result that you have is a bit misleading. Now, of course, the livestock cannot be a producer of energy. Okay, so of course there was some constraint that was not taken into account in the model. So, but again, I think that the strategies that usually in the green growth discussion are discussed about the energy transition are okay. Which is the problem here? The problem is that they are not taking into account the impact on the social sphere. So what we need to understand is that we have to find some solution and some social policies that are still part of the strategy for the ecological transition. So the issue, the gender issue, is one issue that have to take into account if you want to make this transition. Otherwise, we are not able to meet the target that we have. That are really challenging, as I was trying to say before. Okay, so just to clarify, so I think that when we discuss the ecological transition, from a political point of view, the ecological transition, we have not to take into consideration only energy policies, because otherwise we risk to not take into account the social consequences of these policies. So we need to understand which are the social policies that can be I don't know, they work together, there can be some complementarities that can be exploited in order to make this transition. Okay, that's all. I stop here.
Okay, thanks, Simone. Ipek, you want to add something on that, or are you fine? I had the feeling you wanted to. So we are coming to the end. I think to the participants, be patient with the organizer and the moderator. We are like under pressure. We get a lot of questions and we are trying to make sense of them and keep the time and listen to the speakers. It's sometimes not easy and we are also learning. So we will be hopefully do better in the next session. But there's one question that I wanted to ask, which comes from Amrita Sharma, I'm sorry. And it goes as follows. It says, does feminist ecological economics have scope for the LGBTQ plus demography? Do we have research into that? I think the Pride took place very recently, so I think we had to give space to this. So it's a very specific question, but I think it's an interesting. İpek and or Simone, do you want to say something?
Yes, well, definitely a very important question. I should say that within the feminist economics framework, there are a number of very good economists that have been doing research on issues relating to the LGBTQI within the and in the Journal of Feminist Economics, which is put out by IAFFE, the International Association for Feminist Economics. The association has a number of members that work on LGBTQI issues. In the listserv, we have that there are periodically new research that is shared about this issue and their discussions. Yes, it's a developing area for sure, but nevertheless, there is some very important work emerging in that context.
Thanks a lot. Simone, you have something to add on this? No. So before we close, there is another specific question, which, I mean, in general, there are many more methodological questions, right? People asking clarification for certain issue in your lecture and so on. I think some of them can be clarified by the readings that you gave. But there is a question that is getting a lot of comments. So I think it needs space. And it's going back to the issue we covered before in relation to population. We know population is always a tricky issue. So I want to go back to it. So I'm reading the question, right? The participant says, I'm having trouble understanding the issue with population. In Africa, the population will increase largely by 2050. It is clear that population growth is driver of climate change, but from feminist macroeconomics, we will need more labor, as there is the concept of, and here there is a spelling mistake, I think, work time reduction. To which extent these two mechanisms can work together or against each other? Is it possible that the impact of these mechanisms are different based on the regions? Also a question related to work time reduction and the technical skill of workers would not raise the question of education and human capital investment. Sorry for the long message. So I know we have touched upon the issue of population, but maybe if you, and I guess this would be your last comment, if you have a last comment on this issue, it's welcome, and we would leave it there for today.
Well, I don't have more to say on it than what I've already said, except for noting that I think this is an issue, a policy area where we need global coordination for sure. And I think a better defined progressive position. So I'm not exactly sure what that position is. I mean, Simone is saying, it is something that would have a population policy, is something, if I understood you correctly, Simone, is something that would help with the ecological objectives only over the long run. Whereas the ecological problems now, the crisis is so much more pressing that, even if we started with some good population policy now, we're not going to get any results from it within the short time span where we need the solutions. Is that correct? That's how I understood what you were saying. So, okay, fine. But I think still for the longer run, we still need some discuss what a progressive feminist and ecological position is on population policy, because even if we need the solutions beyond population control, in the more shorter run and quick interventions are needed, still over the long run, the question remains. And I think it's something that we need to look into. And of course, in today's political context of, increasingly strong right movements and nationalist movements, it's a very difficult issue to tackle. So it's very politically charged, but nevertheless, I think it's very much there.
Thank you, Ipek. So, of course, I agree with the problem is there. Okay, it's clear. So, however, I'm a bit scared about thinking so much about population, because sometimes there is this risk. I was saying a solution for the problem of the environment is to reduce the population in the world. I really don't like so much to discuss now. And I don't know, it's not your point, Ipek, that is clear. Huh? So, but there are some conservatives or right discussion that tend to say something, so only few people can save from the ecological crisis, so maybe it's easier to reduce the population. So I don't know, let that climate change would make some damages, and also like or pandemics and so on. So just to clarify, our objective for the world and Europe in particular is to be carbon neutral in 2050. Okay, carbon neutral in 2050. So if we are really carbon neutral, probably it means that also per capita we are almost carbon neutral, no? In the sense that we have to find a way to, of course, it's easy to do it if the population is a bit smaller, but I think it's not the main driver of this change. So at least, okay, of course, but I fully agree that from a point of view of social development, it's really important to understand how women emancipation can be a solution to the issue of, I don't know, of like a demographic issue. Okay, that of course are two different issues that both are important, but again, I would not discuss so much the issue of population dynamics with the issue of decarbonization. That again is not the only issue about the ecological crisis that we have, but at least is the one that probably we discuss mostly. No? So this is my perspective, but of course, every time there is this discussion about the population, my concern is that it seems that a solution is to reduce the population. I really don't feel, so I would try to find first many other solutions to the issue. Okay, sorry for being a bit too rude maybe in this point, but just to clarify it.
Oh, it is totally fine. We're all getting a little bit tired also. So I'm keen on, let's be open about it. I'm getting tired. So I think it's 4 o'clock. So I'm very much keen on closing the session. I want to give the chance to Ipek and Simone if they want to make a last statement or a take-home message, and otherwise we can leave it there. I think I'm pretty excited. This was the first live session, the first session of this school, but I think just the first of many events for bringing together feminist and ecological economics. Ipek and Simone, you want to give a last statement, take home message, or just say goodbye? It's up to you.
All I want to say is thank you for this initiative and bringing us together and starting this platform for dialogue. I hope we continue to be part of it.
Okay. So me too. Thanks a lot to everybody. Thanks, Ipek. You were really kind during this debate. It was very nice to meet you here. And just one thing that I'd like to say as a last comment. So all of us, we are thinking to imagine a future in really a couple of decades that are free from emission. Okay, so let's do a bit more like ambitious and say that it's not so bad or so difficult to imagine a world without gender inequality or inequalities in general. So I think it's much more easy to do that than a world with carbon neutral. So please think to solution that can be really made the world sustainable and fair as all of us would like to live, for us and for our children.
I thank you a lot, and keep up with the fight. So thanks a lot, Ipek and Simone, and all the assistants, Daniele, Braulio, Roberto, and Phil, and all the participants for being here. And with the participants, we meet again tomorrow. It's nice being together. Thanks.